The galactic map ends at human space, but no one dares ask. Why? Part 1. The Cartographers. Discovery Ambassador Keth sat in his office on the 97th floor of the Galactic Council building. The tall windows showed the busy space traffic moving around the station. Ships from 100 different worlds came and went every hour. Keth had been working for the Voidani Collective for 20 years. But he had never seen anything like what was on his desk now. The holographic display showed the standard galactic navigation chart. Every sector was marked with clear details. Trade routes glowed in blue lines. Military zones appeared in red. Diplomatic areas were marked in green. Keth had studied thousands of these maps during his career. He knew every major system, every important world, every dangerous region that ships should avoid. But there was something wrong with this map. Something that made no sense. In the outer rim of the galaxy, there was a large area marked simply as human territory. It was bigger than most empires. The space could hold hundreds of star systems, but unlike every other region on the map, this area was completely blank inside. No stars were marked. No planets were labeled. No trade routes passed through it. It was just empty space, with a simple borderline around it. Keth leaned forward and touched the display. He tried to zoom in on the human territory. The map refused to show more details. He tried to access the navigation database for that region. The system returned an error message, access denied, diplomatic classification. This was strange. Keth had high-level clearance. He could access information about secret military bases. He could view classified trade agreements. He could even read reports about species that were not yet ready for contact with the galactic community. But he could not get basic navigation data about human space. Keth had met humans before. They served on the Galactic Council. Ambassador David represented them in most meetings. David was a quiet man who spoke little during debates. He always voted with the majority, never caused problems or made demands. The humans had been members of the council for over 200 years, but they kept to themselves. The more Keth thought about it, the more questions he had. Why was human space not mapped? Why were there no trade routes through their territory? Why did no one ever visit human worlds? Even the most isolated species had some contact with the galactic community. They had tourists, traders, or diplomatic missions. But humans seemed to exist in complete isolation. Keth called up his personal database and searched for information about first contact with humanity. The records showed that the exploration ship Dawn's Edge had made contact in the year 2387. The ship had been on a routine survey mission when they encountered human vessels. The initial reports described the humans as friendly and technologically advanced. They had agreed to join the Galactic Council and had been welcomed as members. But when Keth tried to access the detailed first contact reports, he found that most of the files were sealed. The crew debriefing records were classified at the highest level. The technical analysis of human technology was restricted. Even the basic survey data about human star systems was marked as sensitive information. Keth frowned. This level of security was unusual for a routine first contact mission. Most exploration reports were public records. Scientists and diplomats used them to understand new species and plan future relations. Why would the human contact reports be so heavily classified? He decided to visit the Council's cartography department. The head cartographer was an elderly Centauran named Vel. Vel had been making galactic maps for 50 years. If anyone could explain the blank area in human space, it would be him. Keth found Vel in the main mapping center. The room was filled with holographic displays showing different regions of the galaxy. Dozens of cartographers worked at their stations, updating trade routes and marking new discoveries. Vel was standing at the central display, reviewing a new survey report from the inner rim. Vel, Keth said, approaching the old Centauran. I need to ask you about something. Vel looked up from his work. Of course, Ambassador. What can I help you with? Keth activated his personal display and showed Vel the navigation chart. I was reviewing the standard galactic map, and I noticed that human territory is not detailed. There are no internal markings, no star charts, no navigation data. Is this an error in the system? Vel's expression changed. A friendly smile disappeared from his face. He looked around the room nervously, then stepped closer to Keth. "Ambassador," he said in a low voice, "the human maps are classified for diplomatic reasons. I cannot provide additional details." "But I have high-level clearance," Keth said. "I can access military zone maps and classified trade data. Why can't I see basic navigation information about human space?" Vel shook his head. "Those are different types of classification. The human territorial data is restricted by Special Council directive. I cannot override that restriction." Keth studied Vel's face. The old cartographer was clearly uncomfortable. His hands were shaking slightly, and he kept looking toward the door as if he wanted to leave. This was not the reaction of someone dealing with routine diplomatic restrictions. Keth said carefully, "How long have the human maps been classified?" "Since first contact," Vel replied quickly. "Restriction was put in place immediately after the Dawn's Edge mission. It has never been changed." "That's over 200 years, Keth said. "Surely some of the information can be released by now."
Oh.
Vel stepped back. "I'm sorry, Ambassador, but I cannot discuss this matter further. If you need information about human space, you will need to speak with the Diplomatic Security Office." With that, Vel turned and walked away. Keth watched him go, more confused than ever. He had never seen Vel act so nervous about a simple map question. The old cartographer usually loved to discuss the technical details of galactic navigation. His refusal to talk about human space was completely out of character. Keth left the cartography department with more questions than answers. He walked through the busy corridors of the council building, thinking about what he had learned. The human maps had been classified since first contact. The restriction had never been changed in 200 years. Even basic navigation data was considered too sensitive to share. As he walked, Keth began to notice something else. In all his years at the council, he had never heard anyone discuss visiting human space. Ambassadors often talked about their trips to different worlds. They shared stories about interesting cultures and beautiful planets. But no one ever mentioned traveling to human territory. Keth realized that in 20 years of diplomatic service, he had never met anyone who had actually been to a human world. Every other species in the galaxy had visitors, traders, and tourists. But humans seemed to exist in complete isolation from the rest of the galactic community. This was not normal. This was not how diplomatic relations worked. Something was very wrong with the situation, and Keth was determined to find out what it was. He returned to his office and began making a list of everyone he knew who might have information about human space. It was time to start asking some serious questions, even if no one wanted to answer them. The galactic map ends at human space, but no one dares ask why Part 2, the forbidden questions, Ambassador. Keth spent the next week digging through the council archives. He used every access code he had, searching through decades of diplomatic records. He started with the most recent files and worked backward through time. The deeper he went, the more suspicious the situation became. Every reference to human space was carefully edited. Trade reports mentioned goods received from designated territories without naming specific worlds. Diplomatic summaries spoke of ongoing relations with remote partners without giving details. Military reports discussed perimeter security protocols but never explained what they were protecting. Keth found hundreds of documents that should have contained information about human space. But all the important details had been removed. Someone had spent a lot of time making sure the records stayed clean. This was not normal diplomatic classification. This was deliberate information control. On the third day of his search, Keth found something interesting. Deep in the archives was a partial transmission log from the Dawn's Edge. Most of the file was corrupted, but a few lines were still readable. The exploration ship's captain had written, "Recommend immediate implementation of containment protocols. Human defensive capabilities exceed all known parameters. Suggest council review before formal contact." Keth read the fragment 3 times. Containment protocols. Why would first contact require containment? And what did the captain mean by defensive capabilities exceeding known parameters? The humans had been peaceful members of the galactic community for 2 centuries. Had never threatened anyone or shown aggressive behavior. The next fragment. was even more puzzling. Construction teams report barrier installation proceeding on schedule. Estimated completion in 18 months. Human cooperation has been acceptable given the circumstances. Barrier installation? What kind of barrier? And why would the humans need to cooperate with its construction? Keth tried to access more of the Dawn's Edge records, but the system blocked him at every turn. The files were sealed with the highest possible security classification. Frustrated, Keth decided to try a different approach. He would talk to other ambassadors privately and see what they knew about human space. Maybe someone else had asked these questions before. His first conversation was with Ambassador Ron of the Centauran Republic. Ron was an older diplomat who had served on the council for 30 years. If anyone had institutional memory about the human situation, it would be him. Keth invited Ron to lunch at a private restaurant away from the council building. After they ordered their meals, Keth brought up his concerns about the classified human maps. Ron's reaction was immediate and telling. The Centauran's face went pale, and he looked around the restaurant nervously. "Keth," he said quietly, "you need to drop this line of inquiry. Trust me on this." "Why?" Keth asked. "I'm just curious about some inconsistencies in the navigation." "Data." Ron leaned forward across the table. "My predecessor, Ambassador Talon, was very interested in human space. He asked a lot of questions, pushed for territorial surveys, demanded access to classified records. Do you know what happened to him?" Keth shook his head. He was quietly reassigned to a research station in the outer void. No explanation given, no formal charges filed. Just a transfer order that came down from the highest levels of the council leadership. Talon was a good diplomat with an excellent record, but he disappeared from galactic politics overnight. The message was clear. Asking questions about human space was dangerous to one's career. But this only made Keth more curious. What could be so sensitive that the council would destroy diplomatic careers to keep it secret? Over the next few days, Keth had similar conversations with other ambassadors. Each one reacted with fear when he mentioned human space. Some refused to discuss the topic at all. Others gave him warnings similar to Ron's. But slowly a picture began to emerge. Ambassador Nira of the Aquatic Alliance told him that human trade agreements were handled through automated systems. No one met with human representatives face to face. All negotiations were conducted through secure communication channels with heavy encryption. Ambassador Korg of the Mining Consortium revealed that supply shipments to human space were delivered. 2 relay stations at the border. The cargo was transferred to automated ships that disappeared into human territory. No one knew what happened to the goods after that. Ambassador Lisa of the Academic Federation mentioned that no research expeditions had ever been approved for human space. Every application was denied with the same form letter, access restricted. For diplomatic security reasons, the pattern was clear. The humans were not just isolated from the galactic community, they were completely cut off. No one visited their worlds. No one traded with them directly. No one studied their culture or technology. They existed in a state of total separation that was unlike anything else in the galaxy. But the most disturbing revelation came from Ambassador Wex of the Traders Guild. During a private meeting in Keth's office, Wex revealed something that made Keth's blood run cold. "Want to know the real secret about human space?" Wex said, looking around to make sure they were alone. "It's not on any of the civilian maps, but the military navigation systems show something different. According to the Defense Department's charts, human space is completely surrounded by a structure, a barrier of some kind that encircles their entire territory." Keth felt his heart skip a beat. "What kind of barrier?" "I don't know," Wex replied. "But it's big, really big. The military calls it a containment shell. No ships are allowed within 50 light years of it. The area is permanently off limits to all civilian traffic. A containment shell." The word from the Dawn's Edge fragment suddenly made sense. Someone had built a barrier around human space, but who had built it, and why? Keth thanked Wex for the information and promised to keep their conversation private. After the trader left, Keth sat alone in his office, staring out at the busy space traffic around the council station. Everything he had learned pointed to the same impossible conclusion. The humans were not members of the galactic community. They were prisoners. Someone had built a wall around their entire territory and locked them inside. The question was, who had done this? And what had the humans done to deserve such treatment? Keth made a decision. He was going to find out the truth, no matter what it cost him. The galaxy deserved to know what was really happening in human space. And if the council leadership was involved in some kind of cover-up, then someone needed to expose it. He began making plans for his own investigation. If the official channels were blocked, he would find another way to get answers. The truth was out there waiting to be discovered. The only question was whether he would survive long enough to reveal it. The galactic map ends at human space, but no one dares ask why. Part 3, the expedition to... We guessed! Weeks after his conversation with Ambassador Wex, Keth made a dangerous decision. He was going to see human space for himself. The official channels would not give him answers. He would find them another way. The plan was risky. Unauthorized travel to restricted zones was a serious crime. If the council discovered what he was doing, his diplomatic career would be over. He might even face criminal charges. But Keth had spent too many sleepless nights thinking about containment, shells, and barrier installations. He needed to know the truth. Finding a ship was the first challenge. Official council vessels had tracking systems that reported their location every hour. Military ships were out of the question. Commercial transports followed regulated routes and would not deviate into forbidden space. Keth needed something small, unregistered, completely off the official records. He found his answer in the shipyards of Titan Station. The old survey ship called Walker's Dream had been retired from service 5 years ago. Its owner, a Voidani merchant named Tor, was willing to sell it for a reasonable price. The ship was old but functional. More importantly, it had no official registration or tracking systems. Keth bought the ship using his personal savings. He told Tor that he wanted it for private exploration missions. Tor did not ask many questions. In the outer stations, people minded their own business. Next, Keth needed a crew. He could not use official personnel or anyone connected to the council. He needed people who could keep secrets and were not afraid of breaking a few regulations. He found his pilot through an old friend. Dara was a former military navigator who had left the service after disagreeing with her commanding officers. She was skilled, reliable, and had no love for official authority. When Keth explained that the mission involved exploring restricted space, she agreed immediately. The scientist was harder to find. Keth needed someone with expertise in sensor technology and space phenomena. He eventually located Eve, a young researcher who had been blacklisted from the Academic Federation for publishing controversial theories about galactic history. Eve was eager for a chance to prove his ideas were correct. The communications specialist came recommended by Dara. Finn was a technical expert who specialized in encrypted transmissions and signal analysis. He had worked for various intelligence agencies but preferred freelance contracts. The promise of discovering something the council wanted to hide was enough to convince him to join the mission. With his crew assembled, Keth spent a week preparing Walker's Dream for the journey. They installed additional sensor equipment and upgraded the communication systems. They loaded extra supplies and fuel for an extended mission. Most importantly, they programmed false flight plans that would hide their real destination. The journey to human space took 12 days. They traveled through unmonitored space lanes and avoided all official checkpoints. Dara plotted a course that kept them away from major shipping routes and military patrol zones. To anyone watching, they were just another civilian ship on a routine cargo run. As they approached the coordinates that marked the edge of human territory, Keth felt his excitement growing. Soon, he would have answers to all his questions. Soon, he would know why human space was such a closely guarded secret. But when they reached the boundary, Keth discovered that nothing could have prepared him for what they found. The sensors began acting strangely when they were still 2 light years from the border. Eve noticed the anomalies first. The readings were showing impossible data. According to the instruments, there was something solid in space ahead of them, something huge. "This cannot be right," Eve said, checking his equipment. "The sensors are showing a continuous object that extends in all directions. But space is empty here. There should be nothing but void and distant stars." Dara reduced their speed and activated the ship's main viewing screen. At first, everything looked normal. They could see stars scattered across the darkness of space. But as they moved closer, something began to block out the starlight ahead of them. It started as a small dark area that grew larger as they approached. Soon, the darkness covered half their view. Then, 3/4. Finally, they could see nothing ahead but a vast black surface that stretched beyond the limits of their vision. "What is that thing?" Finn asked, staring at the screen in disbelief. Keth felt his mouth go dry. He was looking at the containment shell that Wex had mentioned. But seeing it in person was completely different from reading about it in classified reports. The structure was enormous beyond imagination. It was like looking at a solid wall that had been built around an entire region of the galaxy. Eve ran every sensor scan he could think of. The results were all the same. The barrier was solid matter, not energy or some kind of force field. Appeared to be made of an unknown material that their instruments could not identify. The surface showed no seams, no joints, no access points of any kind. It was perfectly smooth and featureless. "How big is this thing?" Ara asked. Eve checked his calculations twice before answering. "Based on the curvature, I estimate it forms a complete sphere around human space. The diameter would be approximately 400 light-years. The surface area would be larger than most star systems. 400 light-years. Keth tried to imagine the amount of material that would be needed to build such a structure. It would require the resources of thousands of worlds. The construction would take centuries, even with the most advanced technology. But the most disturbing discovery came when they tried to scan through the barrier. Their most powerful sensors could not penetrate the surface at all. Whatever material the shell was made from, it blocked every form of radiation and energy. They could not see what was inside. They could not detect any ships, planets, or stars beyond the barrier. Human space was completely hidden from the outside galaxy. Finn tried to establish communication with whatever was inside the shell. He broadcast on every frequency used by galactic civilization. He sent standard greeting messages in dozens of languages. He even tried old Earth communication protocols that humans had used centuries ago, but there was no response. The barrier seemed to absorb all transmissions without letting anything pass through. They spent 3 days exploring the outer surface of the shell. They traveled hundreds of kilometers in different directions, but the structure remained exactly the same. There were no doors, no windows, no communication arrays. It was like a prison with no way in or out. On the 4th day, something changed. Finn's communication equipment detected a faint signal coming from the barrier. It was not a response to their messages. It seemed to be an automated transmission being broadcast on a very specific frequency. Finn worked for hours to decode the signal. When he finally succeeded, the message made Keth's blood run cold. "Warning to all vessels," the transmission said. "You are approaching a restricted containment zone. Unauthorized entry is forbidden. Maintain minimum distance of 50 light-years. This message repeats every standard hour. A containment zone." The humans were not just isolated. They were imprisoned behind a wall that kept them completely separated from the rest of the galaxy. Someone had built the ultimate prison around their entire civilization. But who had built it? And why had they gone to such extreme measures to contain humanity? The galactic map ends at human space, but no one dares ask why. Part 4. The truth revealed for 3 more days. Keth's team continued their investigation of the massive barrier. They mapped sections of the surface, took detailed sensor readings, and tried every communication protocol they could think of. The structure remained silent and impenetrable. Whatever was happening inside human space, the outside galaxy was not meant to know about it. On the 7th day of their mission, Finn made a breakthrough. While scanning for communication signals, he detected something different. There was a faint transmission coming from somewhere beyond the barrier. It was not the automated warning they had heard before. This signal was encrypted and directed toward a specific location in space. The transmission is not meant for us, Finn explained to the others. It's a tight beam communication aimed at the galactic core. Someone inside the barrier is sending messages to the council leadership. Eve adjusted their sensors to track the signal's destination. The beam was indeed pointed directly at the Galactic Council station, thousands of light years away. This meant that despite the complete isolation, some form of communication was still possible between human space and the outside galaxy. "Can you intercept the message?" Keth asked. Finn worked on his equipment for several hours. Encryption was extremely advanced, but he had dealt with similar systems before. Slowly, he began to decode fragments of the transmission. The first piece they recovered was a voice speaking in standard galactic language. The accent was human, but the words were formal and official. Weekly status report to Council Command. Containment protocols remain stable. Population compliance continues at acceptable levels. Resource allocation proceeding as scheduled. Keth felt a chill run down his spine. The voice was discussing humans as if they were prisoners being managed by guards. But who was speaking? Is this a human collaborator working with their captors? Finn continued his work, recovering more fragments of the transmission. The next piece was even more disturbing. Construction of the new residential sectors in Zone 7 is complete. The relocation of families from the overcrowded areas has begun. We estimate full integration within 6 months. Residential sectors? Relocation of families? Sounded like the humans were being moved around inside their prison like livestock. Being managed by farmers, the third fragment revealed something that made Keth's hands shake. The research teams report significant progress on the containment project. Dr. Kane believes we may have a solution within the next decade. If successful, we could potentially demonstrate that controlled interaction with the outside galaxy is possible. A solution? Controlled interaction? This suggested that the humans were actively working on some kind of problem. But what were they trying to solve? The final fragment of the transmission provided the most shocking revelation of all. Changed, becoming more personal and less formal. Director Hayes to Council Command. I want to reiterate our position on the current situation. The human population continues to cooperate with the containment protocols because we understand the necessity. However, our people are growing restless. 200 years is a long time to remain isolated. Needs some indication that the Council is willing to consider eventual release if we can prove our technology is no longer dangerous. Keth stared at the communication equipment in stunned silence. Director Hayes was human. The person managing the containment was working from inside the barrier. This was not a prison guard talking to his superiors. This was a prisoner negotiating with his captors, but the most important word in the entire message was dangerous. The humans had technology that was considered dangerous by the Galactic Council, so dangerous that the entire species had been locked away for 2 centuries. "Did you hear that?" Eve whispered. "The humans are imprisoned because of their technology. The Council is afraid of what they might do if they were free." Dara shook her head in disbelief. What kind of technology could be so dangerous that you would lock up an entire civilization? Before anyone could answer, Finn's equipment detected another signal. This one was coming from a different direction entirely. It was not from inside the barrier, but from somewhere in normal space. The transmission was much stronger and was broadcasting on multiple frequencies. "Incoming message," Finn announced. "This one is directed at us specifically." He activated the main communication system. Clear voice filled the ship's bridge. The accent was human, but the tone was authoritative and serious. "Unknown vessel. This is Director Hayes of the Terran Containment Authority. We have detected your ship and monitored your activities near the barrier. We're in violation of galactic security protocols. Identify yourself and state your purpose." Keth looked at his crew. They had been discovered. But instead of fear, he felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, someone was willing to talk to them directly. "This is Ambassador Keth of the Voidani Collective," he replied. "I am investigating irregularities in the galactic navigation records. I have questions about the status of human space. There was a long pause before Director Hayes responded. Ambassador Keth, you have stumbled into a situation that is far more complex than you realize. Your investigation has already put you in considerable danger. The Council leadership does not tolerate unauthorized inquiries into human containment protocols. Are you really imprisoned? Keth asked directly. Another pause. Then, yes, Ambassador. My people have been contained within this barrier for 212 years. We are not members of the galactic community by choice. We are prisoners. Admission hit Keth like a physical blow.
Oh.
Everything he had suspected was true. The humans were not isolated by their own decision. They were being held against their will by the Galactic Council. Why? Keth asked. What did your people do to deserve this? Director Hayes' voice became sad and tired. We made a discovery, Ambassador. During our early space exploration, we developed a technology that could manipulate the fundamental forces that hold the galaxy together. We thought it was a breakthrough that would benefit all civilizations. But when the first contact team from the Dawn's Edge analyzed our capabilities, they realized the potential for destruction. Keth remembered the fragment from the Dawn's Edge records. Human defensive capabilities exceed all known parameters. Our technology could theoretically destabilize star systems, Hayes continued. In the wrong hands, it could unravel the gravitational bonds that keep the galaxy intact. The Council leadership faced a terrible choice. Risk the destruction of galactic civilization, or contain the threat permanently. But surely that was 2 centuries ago, Keth protested. Haven't your people learned to control this technology? Have, Hayes replied. That is what we have been working on for the past 200 years. We have developed safeguards, limitations, and control systems that make our technology completely safe. But the Council refuses to believe us. They prefer to maintain the containment rather than risk any possibility of galactic destruction. Keth felt sick. An entire civilization had been imprisoned because of fear. The humans had been locked away. Not because of what they had done, but because of what they might do. Director Hayes, Keth said quietly, how many people are inside the barrier? Currently, about 40 billion humans live within the containment zone. We have built a complete civilization inside the barrier. We have cities, governments, schools, and research facilities. But we are still prisoners, Ambassador. We have been prisoners for over 2 centuries. 40 billion people, an entire species locked away because the galaxy was afraid of their potential for destruction. The galactic map ends at human space, but no one dares ask, why Part 5, the choice. Communication with Director Hayes continued for several hours. Keth found himself in the impossible position of being the first outside diplomat to speak directly. With the imprisoned human leadership in over 2 centuries, the weight of that responsibility was crushing. Director Hayes, Keth said carefully, I need to understand something. If your people have been contained for so long, how do humans serve on the Galactic Council? I have met Ambassador David many times. Hayes' voice became quieter, more personal. Ambassador David is one of 12 volunteers who agreed to permanent exile from human space. They live on Council Station and can never return home. They represent us in name only, with no real power to change our situation. Their families will never see them again. The sacrifice was staggering. 12 people had given up everything to maintain the illusion that humans were free members of galactic society. They were prisoners representing prisoners with no hope of ever returning to their own people. The trade agreements you mentioned, Keth continued. What are those really about? Survival, Hayes replied bluntly. We have built a complete civilization inside the barrier, but we still need certain raw materials that are not available in our contained systems. The Council provides these resources in exchange for our continued cooperation with the containment protocols. What kind of cooperation? We agree not to attempt escape. We agree not to develop weapons that could threaten the barrier. We agree to limit our population growth to sustainable levels. In return, we receive food supplies, medical equipment, and basic materials for construction. Keth felt sick. The humans were being fed like animals in a zoo, given just enough resources to survive, but nothing more. Their entire civilization existed at the mercy of their captors. Director Hayes, what would happen if you stopped cooperating?
Oh,
There was a long pause. The Council has made their position very clear. If we violate the containment agreements, they will stop all resource shipments. 40 billion people would face starvation within a year. We cannot take that risk. The humans were trapped not just by the physical barrier, but by their dependence on outside resources. The Council had created a perfect prison where the inmates had to cooperate or die. But Keth sensed there was more to the story. Director Hayes, you mentioned that your people have developed safeguards for the dangerous technology. Can you explain what that means? Hayes's voice became more animated. Ambassador, our scientists have spent 2 centuries studying the problem. We have created control systems that make our technology completely safe to use. We can demonstrate this to any scientific team the Council chooses to send. We can prove that we no longer pose a threat to galactic stability. But the Council refuses to consider this, correct? The current leadership believes that any risk, no matter how small, is unacceptable. They prefer to maintain the status quo rather than take any chance of catastrophic failure. Keth understood the Council's position, but he also understood the terrible injustice of the situation. Fear had created a system where an entire species was punished for a potential threat that might not even exist anymore. Ambassador Keth Hayes continued, I need you to understand something important. Your investigation has not gone unnoticed by the Council leadership. They know you are here. They know you have been asking questions. You are in serious danger. If to confirm Hayes's warning, Finn's communication equipment suddenly activated. A new voice filled the ship's bridge. It was cold, official, and unmistakably threatening. Ambassador Keth, this is Admiral Rex of Council Security. We're engaged in unauthorized investigation of classified materials. Return to Council Station. Immediately for debriefing, Keth looked at his crew. Laura was already calculating jump coordinates for a quick escape. Eve was shutting down the sensor equipment to avoid detection. Finn was working to encrypt their communication logs. Admiral Rex Keth replied, I am conducting legitimate diplomatic inquiry into irregularities in galactic records. Your inquiry has violated multiple security protocols, Rex responded. You have accessed restricted space without authorization. You've intercepted classified communications. You've made contact with contained subjects. These actions constitute serious criminal offenses. The phrase contained subjects made Keth's blood boil. The Admiral was talking about 40 billion human beings, as if they were laboratory specimens. Admiral, I have discovered evidence of unlawful imprisonment of an entire species. This matter requires full investigation by the Council. Rex's voice became even colder. Ambassador, you are operating under a fundamental misunderstanding. There is no imprisonment. There is necessary containment of a galactic threat. This containment has been approved by the highest levels of Council authority for over 2 centuries. Based on what current evidence, Keth demanded? The humans have developed safeguards for their technology. They have cooperated fully with all containment protocols. They pose no threat to galactic security. That is not for you to determine, Rex replied. You will return to Council Station immediately, or we will consider you to be in violation of galactic security laws. Keth made his decision. Admiral Rex, I respectfully decline your order. I am gathering evidence of crimes against galactic civilization. I will not abandon this investigation. The communication channel went silent. Rex had cut the connection, but the message was clear. Keth was now considered a criminal by the Council leadership. Director Hayes, Keth said, reopening the previous channel. What happens now? Now you face the same choice that every person who has discovered the truth about human containment has faced. Hayes replied, you can return to Council Station, accept their version of events, and never speak of this again. Your career will continue, and you will be allowed to live in ignorance of what you have learned. Or you can join the underground movement that is working to end human containment. There are others, Ambassador. Diplomats, scientists, military officers who have learned the truth and chosen to act on it. They work in secret, gathering evidence, building support, preparing for the day when the truth can no longer be hidden. Keth thought about everything he had learned. 40 billion people imprisoned for 2 centuries because of fear. 12 volunteers exiled forever to maintain a diplomatic fiction. An entire civilization reduced to begging for basic survival resources. How many others know the truth? He asked. More than the council leadership realizes, Hayes replied. The secret is becoming harder to keep. Each generation of diplomats includes some who ask the right questions, some who refuse to accept the official explanations. The underground movement grows stronger every year. What is the ultimate goal? To present the evidence to the full Galactic Council, not just the leadership. To demand a fair hearing for human release. To prove that continued containment is no longer necessary or justified. Keth looked at his crew. Dara nodded grimly. Eve was already downloading data to secure storage devices. Finn was establishing encrypted communication protocols. Director Hayes, Keth said with determination, consider me part of your underground movement. What do you need me to do? Return to Council Station and continue your normal duties. Share what you have learned with others who can be trusted. Gather more evidence when opportunities arise. And prepare for the day when we will demand justice for my people. The choice was made. Keth would not abandon 40 billion imprisoned humans to their fate. He would not allow fear to triumph over justice. The truth about human containment would be revealed no matter what the cost, as Walker's dream turned away from the massive barrier and began its journey back to civilized space. Keth realized that his life had changed forever. He was no longer just a diplomat. He was now part of a growing rebellion against one of the galaxy's greatest injustices. The map might end at human space, but the story of their imprisonment was just beginning to unfold.